Welcome back. Welcome back. It's good to see you guys again. Here we are. Communication principles, obviously, human communication. Unit 1, lessons 3 and 4. So I'm going to just move past that. That's just for your own sake. When we think about communication, it's essential to our lives, right? It's integrated in all parts of our lives. It's again back to that, we're always communicating something. And this course is meant to help people see the value of better communication within the real world and in our real lives, and how it can affect your life with increased salary, positive experiences with others, and give you an edge within life. When I say real communication, I don't mean to imply that there's some part of our lives that's not real, right? I'm saying that communication is real and essential to us. From birth to death, even beyond, we create communication. Think about that statement for a moment and what I mean by it. From birth, we cry for our needs, right? Initial needs. We learn to interact with people in a very selfish manner because we're young. We don't know any different. We don't know any better. So when we think about that, even as we move through life, we learn life lessons, right? How to be courteous, how to be nice, kind. And again, I apologize. I'm still under the weather. So, and even into death, people communicate with the dead, right? Or they think they do. I'm not going to tell them they don't. I'm not going to tell them they do. But I mean, the point is, even I have talked to my dead grandmother, right? She was one of my best cheerleaders in life. And I miss her. And so sometimes I say, this one's for you, Grandma, and just move on. Am I really communicating with the dead? Probably not. But the point is, even the ceremony of a funeral is communication to us. And it's worthwhile and it's important. And since communication is a practical field of study, I use that what you're reading in the book or what you're getting in these lectures isn't about theory and vocabulary or passing a test and or giving a good speech. I'm not going to deny that there's a divide sometimes, or even imply that there isn't a divide between the classroom and the real world. The real world is whatever we're experiencing at any given moment, but we can bring our classroom learning into that real world moment because communication is integrated in all of our lives. It's widely accepted that we can divide our lives into 4 spheres. We have academic, professional, personal, and civic. You may or may not have watched that first lesson, but I talk about that in my very first, before lesson 1, just how to navigate the class, about myself and a bit about my life journey. Also, I read the syllabus. So if you missed that one, well, good on you, but you might have missed some important information. If you listened to it, you heard about my life's journey from a personal sense, but also a communication sense. And you can see that boundaries and borders between those spheres, between my personal life and my professional life, or my academic life and my professional life, are not solid. There's a lot of overlap. What goes on in a classroom like this is present within professional environments, and the classroom has long been the place to prepare students to become active, responsible citizens in their civic lives. The philosophy behind this approach is called integrated learning. I'm totally into this, by the way, which it gives you the power to reflect on the content we're teaching, learn how to connect it to other classes or even real life experiences to help better yourself and your professional goals and in your civic responsibilities. So let's talk about the spheres. Academic, obviously, here we are taking this communication class, right? I challenge you to make explicit connections within this course and other courses you're taking. When you leave this class, I want you to connect the content in future classes back to the things you learn here. That's the goal. If you're already starting to see these connections now, you can build on those and build your foundational communication skills that you're learning here and become a competent communicator, and that will help you as a student. Research shows that people who have poor communication skills can improve a wide range of verbal, nonverbal, and interpersonal communication skills by just taking a course like this. When I think about professional, in my life, the Professional Association of College and Employers has been pretty important, especially as an instructor. And it's found that most employers desire candidates with good communication skills in the graduates they hire. Desired communication skills vary from career to career, but the textbook gives you a foundation which you can use those skills to better your life in your profession. If you think about an attorney, he'll have different communication skill needs than a nurse or a general ed teacher, right? Interpersonal communication skills are just highly sought after by potential employers, and they do translate into higher earnings. Research shows that introductory communication courses provide important skills, for functioning in entry-level jobs, including listening, writing, motivating and persuading, interpersonal skills, and informational interviewing. So when we think about our personal sphere, communication, it forms, maintains, and ends our interpersonal relationships. This is more evident than just talk shows like Maury, right? When he finds out he's not the father, right? He rolls off and he acts a fool and he runs off stage, right? And probably doesn't interact with that person anymore in their life, even though they might be in the neighborhood. I want you to think about your own interpersonal relationships. And when we get to those interpersonal communication chapters in this textbook, I hope that you'll be intrigued and excited by the relevance and practicality of the concepts and theories we're going to discuss and how they can help you in your personal relationships. And while we do learn from experience, until we learn specific vocabulary and develop foundational knowledge about communication concepts and theories, we don't have the tools that we need to make sense of those experiences. How many of you have ever heard somebody say, "Oh my gosh, my ex is just crazy," right? What does that even mean? I mean, yeah, maybe they are crazy, but the point is, just a random statement like that doesn't justify or verify anything. It's just someone shifting blame for a failed relationship onto the other person. So I'm going to teach you how to have a better vocabulary and be able to understand those communication phenomena in our lives. So that way you can be ultimately a better personal communicator and avoid some mistakes. And then we talk about civic. When I talk about civic, I'm talking about in our community. It could be our church. It could be people in the community, right? And how we can improve the quality of life for community members. We can raise awareness about social, cultural, or political issues. And we can, let's dive into that one, politics, right? Civic part of our lives is developed through engagement with decision making that goes on at our societal level, right? At the small group, local, state, regional, national, and international levels. We learn early on what our beliefs are going to be, and those do affect our communication in civics. So when we think about involvement in civics, you could be on a neighborhood watch committee. You could send an email to your U.S. Senator. You could call up Marjorie Taylor Greene and tell her how you feel. You could discuss with people in your community about things that are coming up, decisions that need to be made, excuse me, that will affect your community. Right now, I'm deeply involved in Gainesville water situation. Our water quality is really poor. And it has to do with Lake Lanier being so low. That's one of the major. And let's be real, Lake Lanier's been low for more or less 10 years now. We get the water level back up for a little while, but then it goes back down, back up, down. We're going to have to make decisions on how we're going to get our water in this area. When we think about civics is about the greater good. Aristotle is the one that really first and most influentially wrote books on civics, and that was 2,400 years ago. He said, through our voice, our ability to communicate, and how we engage with the world around us, how we participate in society, ultimately allows us to become a virtuous citizen. Okay. The greater good, helping others. It's well established, an unfortunate fact, unfortunately, that younger people between 18 and 30 are some of the least politically active, least engaged members of our democracy. You rarely see them in civic meetings, just not engaged. And while younger people, don't think I'm harping on you, have tended not to be politically engaged as other age groups have, the current generation of 16 to 29-year-olds, known as millennials, tends to be more involved in volunteerism and active community service, helping others when in times of need. So I got to give you that. You guys step it up when you need to, and I appreciate that. You know, we worked hard to instill upon our stepdaughter why you should volunteer efforts, why you should help others. Not for what you're going to get, but just the good of feeling good about doing good, right? When we think about the greater good, it tends to be needs-based communication, right? One of the reasons why we communicate is needs-based communication. As a baby, we scream and cry because we're hungry. Needs-based communication. Don't even know how to use words yet, but we're getting our point across. My dogs get their point across when they need to go outside, right? They let me know by barking, going to the door, and we have this little touchpad on the door that rings a doorbell. Well, it rings our doorbell. And lets me know that when they need to go to the bathroom, I need to take them out because they're already at the door and they're right ready to go. All needs-based communication. So that's one of the reasons why we communicate. So let's talk about it. It's the most important reason we communicate. We communicate in this way to achieve physical and instrumental needs. It also feeds our identities and our relationship in ways that exceed the content of what we say. So, you're going to see Maslow's hierarchy of needs in this because it's important. Because communication doesn't happen in a vacuum. Remember what I said earlier about needs-based communication? My wife kind of shuts down and gets hangry when she's hungry. There's a perfect example of it. Our physical needs are the needs that we keep our bodies and minds functioning. Communication, which we associate with our brain, our mouth, our eyes, and ears, actually has many more connections to our physical body and our overall well-being. At a basic level, communication can alert others that our physical needs are not being met. When we think about hunger, how it can affect conversations or even affect us learning in a classroom, right? Maslow states that basic needs, one level needs to be met before you can get to the next level. So, we can't get to be the best human being that we can be without our physiological needs being met, then our safety needs being met, a sense of love and belonging being met, which in turn gives us better self-esteem, Helps us self-actualize and become a better person by seeing the needs of others. Instrumental needs, next level, are things that help us get life done in our day-to-day communication, right? Our day-to-day goals. When we think about our day-to-day goals, the communication tasks, it could be a job interview, a sales pitch, a parent-teacher conference, the airplane, the emergency evacuation speech on the airplane, right? Knowing what our role would be. If we sit near a wing, we're going to have to open a door. Team projects, even taking this class or teaching this class are all examples of instrumental needs of communication. Fulfilling those goals is an ongoing communicative task, meaning we spend so much time communicating for instrumental needs. Probably most of our time is spent taken up in that area. Sometimes those needs are to influence others, right? Or get the information we need to do our job. When we think about getting information from others or receiving information from others, there are ways we can make it more efficient. We can use tactics, right? And when we talk about tactics that we use for compliance gaining, we can offer rewards to others, promise that they'll get accolades for a job well done. We can threaten punishment by holding things over people's heads or a loss of privileges, right? We can use our expertise by saying, well, I know, so tell me what you know, and then I'll explain it to you. Sometimes mansplaining, right? Liking. We gain compliance by acting friendly and helpful to the other person, getting them in a good mood before asking them to give up information or help us do something. Or we call upon previous debts because we've been nice to that person and they owe us one. Altruism. That's me saying, oh, I know, I just want what's best for you, right? I just want what's best for you. And truly I do. And then ultimately, we can use esteem. People will think more highly of somebody if they comply to give us the information or communicate in a way. When we think about relational needs include things that help us maintain social bonds, interpersonal relationships. When we think about relational needs, that kind of communicating helps us achieve like social relating, conversations, networking. But also, relational needs of communication are, think about interpersonal, how we start, maintain, and end relationships. We may not use nonverbals to start a communication stream, but the point is, even in that, we're communicating, right? Once we form that relationship, right, and then with a conversation, usually nonverbals and then a conversation, we have to maintain that relationship, otherwise it goes away. So we use communication to express our continued liking of that person. You're a great friend. Thanks for all the help you've given me, things like that, right? Our relationships vary in terms of closeness and intimacy. All individuals have relational needs, and every relationship needs some sort of maintenance. When we think about that idea set, that we need to maintain social bonds and interpersonal relationships, that our communication is essential in that, and that we meet our relational needs by communicating with others, it helps us understand that we are really involved in communication at a much deeper level than we even thought about. If we lack communication or quit communicating with someone, it helps us end our relationships. Let me give you an example of that. One of my dear friends used to be one of my best friends. His father passed away. I was a pallbearer at his funeral. In that vacuum, that void, the woman he had been dating for 2 years got him to propose marriage, and she ended up pregnant, purposefully, mind you. She does not like me. I had a conscious choice to make. I can step back, allowing him to be with his new partner, his new child on the way. Now, when I say this, he is literally at this point in his life 48 years old. He has already raised a child. That child now has a child, so he is a grandfather, and now he's having a second kid. I had personal feelings. I had a lot of thoughts. He needed to be saving for retirement. He needed to get his life back on track. But in that moment, it didn't matter what I wanted to communicate. It was just going to drive a wedge in between us. Ultimately, what I chose to do is have a face-to-face with him, communicate how it made me feel, his choices, how I didn't feel like they would be beneficial for him, but I have to respect that. And then, because his wife did not like me, I was going to have to take a break in communicating with him. We would communicate very rarely, 3, 4, 5 times a year maybe. He agreed very reluctantly. He was trying to find a workaround. I didn't see one. I've lived long enough to... It wasn't going to happen. I also, in that moment, realized that reviewing his friendship to me, I had been there many, many times when he was in need, and he had only been there a couple times when I was in need. In that, I realized that the relationship wasn't worth trying to continue to keep alive. So that went from 5 times a year to 3 times a year to 2 times a year to 1 time a year to we haven't even talked in the last 2 years. He's busy. He's got a life. I'm busy. I've got a life. And while I do care for him and I wish him the best, I wasn't going to stand in the way of his life, even though I didn't agree. And I certainly wasn't going to be a problem for his marriage. So, that said, I chose to end a communication by not communicating. A whole relationship ended. And that's basically where we're at. We're going to talk more about those in interpersonal communication. Relational dialects theory, okay? This is about human interaction. The 4 key features of relational dialect theory are contradiction, totality, and praxis, basically. Did I say totality process? Totality and process. Goodness gracious. So contradiction. Relationships are always in contradiction because they have inbuilt tensions. Again, me and my friend's relationship, his then girlfriend, then became wife, was one of our inbuilt tensions. When we think about totality, that theory believes that you should look at the totality of the contradictions in the relationship, see the challenges that exist, and how to address them. I did that, right? I looked at the problems. I realized there wasn't a good path moving forward. Remember that relationships are constantly in a process of change, so they never stay the same. Meaning, if I don't communicate, this relationship will end. This friendship will probably end. And it more or less has. We're still friends, but, right? There's that praxis. We can either accept and accommodate someone's needs or act out negatively as tensions occur, meaning as conflict occur. We didn't have a fight. We didn't create a tension or conflict. His wife created some tensions and conflict, and I decided to step away. It's as simple as that. It's not worth having a communication that's going to put my friend in jeopardy. When we think about communication, our identity comes into play. And identity needs come into play. Because we need to present ourselves to others in certain ways, right? I want you to think about 4 or 5 adjectives that you could describe yourself, right? I did this in like 10 minutes. This is my identity. I'd like you to just kind of do it. You don't have to send me your results, but I want you to think about it. As Professor Willard, but then I get out of Professor Willard. You'll see it as I move through this. I'm educated. I'm naturally sarcastic, which in turn creates tension in communication. I'm humorous when allowed. I'm unique. I'm genuine and caring. I'm hardworking, but fun-loving in my free time. I'm a music lover. I'm a historian. I'm a baseball lover. I'm a die-hard St. Louis Blues fan. 2019, baby. That's all I can say. Finally got a Stanley Cup. I'm from the Midwest. I'm adventuresome, which kind of goes along with my Viking heritage. I'll mention that in a moment. I'm dedicated. I'm faithful. I'm diligent. I'm creative. I'm a published writer. I'm a published poet. I'm a communicative. Oh, my throat. Communicative. Sorry. The sore throat is killing me. I do suffer from wanderlust. And I love to tell stories. Because I've had lots of interesting things happen to me. And I really do think that that's part of my Viking heritage. And that's me. In a nutshell. That's my identity. In a nutshell. But our identity changes as we progress through life. I wasn't always a professor. I was a minor league baseball player for 2 years. That didn't work out. It stinks. I would have loved for it to work out, but it didn't. The point is, we change, we evolve. But communication is always the primary need or means of establishing our identity and reaching our identity needs. Communication allows us to present ourselves to others in particular ways. Just as companies, celebrities, politicians create public images, so do we. We seek to present different faces in different contexts. I can be firm when I need to, but I don't want to be firm. I'd rather not. I'd rather us have fun and get the work done, learn, and enjoy life. Irving Goffman compared self-presentation to a performance, basically like theater, and suggested we all perform different roles in different contexts. Even Shakespeare said that. Indeed, competent communicators can successfully manage how others perceive them by adapting to situations and contexts. Think about parents. Think about how parents have to respond. Right? We have to help our children understand we can't get angry without just cause, and even with just cause, we still shouldn't be super angry. They don't need to see that. When I think about kids behave badly because they're determined to get their needs met right in that moment, right? Then there's my wife's go-to. She pretends she doesn't have any needs at all. She's tough. She can do it on her own. You know what? Life's taught her to be that way. I'm trying to teach her that I'm here to help. And then sometimes we believe that something's wrong with us if we need other people. So we choose to isolate, push ourselves away from others. Those are all 3 unhealthy ways to behave when we want to meet our relational needs through communication. Remember, communication is a process, right? And we're going to go back to this time and time again. This is the definition again. Communication is a process that involves an interchange of verbal and nonverbal messages / symbols within a continuous and dynamic sequence of events. So sorry. Couldn't get to the button in time. When we refer to communication as a process, we imply that it doesn't have a beginning or an ending that's really recognizable, or it doesn't follow a predetermined sequence of events. It's a lot more free-form than we realize. Communication is a process. when we think about communication, it's in messages, we're trying to get people to perceive them and understand them. Sometimes those messages could be okay, right? Sometimes that message might be this, like when somebody cuts you off in traffic and you might gesture with one finger. I mean, I don't recommend doing that, but I've had plenty of people do that to me recently. So, you know, that's not words, that's not verbal, but we are understanding what the message is, right? We're understanding that it's tailored and targeted to us. And that's so not involuntary. We have to receive it. We have to see it. When we think about interpersonal communication, it happens in our heads. It isn't intended necessarily for others to perceive it. It wouldn't be considered communication by this strict standard, but yet everybody's trying to understand communication, right? How the words flow, what the words mean, how are people going to react. And here's an example, trying to guide you through those thought processes. You and I are riding on a bus. You're sitting across from me. As I sit, I'm thinking about the stressful week ahead, crinkle up my forehead, shake my head, put my head in my hands. You see this and think, oh, that guy must be stressed out. In this scenario, did communication take place? I didn't really intend for you to see my nonverbal communication. And you didn't intend to think that this guy must be stressed out, right? But yet it happened. We were unintentionally sending and receiving messages. So here we are communicating, even in that space. I had a student, my first semester of teaching. I've taught for almost 10 years now. And when will it be 10 years? I taught summer. So in June, it'll be 10 years. I once had a student fall asleep my very first semester, teaching this very class. Different school, slightly different curriculum, different book. You won't believe how similar the two books are, though. And I couldn't help but think he was bored. And when we took a break, I spoke to him, like at the end of class, basically. I spoke to him one-on-one. I asked him for ways to liven the class. Ultimately, what I found was he had stayed up the night before to write a paper. Never got any sleep. And then my course was 9 o'clock in the morning. So, it wasn't that my class was boring, but I took it personal, even though that wasn't what he was communicating. Once we had verbal communication, I realized what had happened. He understood, and he did a better job of understanding the relationship of a student-teacher, right? Of that lecture. And I appreciated that. I learned, he learned. It was a beautiful communication stream where we both got something out of it. Remember that communication is a process. Communication doesn't always follow a neat and discernible format, which makes studying communication interactions and phenomena difficult. Anytime we try to isolate a process out for study or closer examination, we artificially freeze the process of communication in an effort to examine one segment, and that's not how communication works in real life. But sometimes scholars want to isolate specific stages in a process or specific responses to gain insight. Say, for instance, what a lack of eye contact might do, or certain words might do, and how it might change the communication stream. But by doing that, it changes the very process of communication itself, and it's not isolated in a bubble. So ultimately, the whole process may change when we change one small segment. Those snapshots, though, are useful for scholarly interrogation of the communication process, and it helps us decode or evaluate our own communication practices, troubleshoot problematic encounters that we've had or could have, and slow things down for various contexts before we engage in communication And that's something we're going to talk about in this class too. Think before we speak. We've already learned that in the transaction model of communication, we communicate using multiple channels and we send and receive messages simultaneously. That's really how life works. There are also other messages and stimuli around us that we never truly perceive because we can only pay attention to so much, only retain so much information at one time. The dynamic nature of communication allows us to examine the principles of communication that are related to the process of communication. So, communication message also vary in terms of conscious thought that goes into their creation. In general, we can say intentional communication usually includes some more conscious thought than unintended communication does. It's subconscious. For instance, some communication is reactionary and honestly involuntary. If we stub our toe, we say ouch. If we're frightened, we scream. If we're bored, we stare blankly. It's not the richest type of communication, but it is communication. Our interactions are more substantial and include more conscious thought, but they're still very routine. Think about that phrase, excuse me, before we move past a stranger, right? It's routine, but it's necessary. It keeps people from being upset, hopefully. How about how we say thank you or sorry? We do this for civility and to convey meaning in an awkward moment or situation. We're thankful. Whoops. Sorry. As we learn later on in this course, the degree of consciousness and intention doesn't mean that all of communication will be effective, understood, or even ethical. But we're going to talk more about that. But ethical communicators, I do want you to think about that, cannot avoid responsibility for the effects of what they say by simply claiming they didn't intend for their communication to cause the desired effect. All communication has short and long-term effects, and this illustrates what we're going to discuss next. Communication is irreversible. And the reason I included these two is because there's a lot going on in this the world right now. But Marjorie Taylor Greene has changed the way she's effectively communicating the masses. Donald Trump has amped up his communication in his second term, the way he chooses to communicate. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm stating this is what's happened. And it's interesting that it's happened. And it's because of communication between the two of them that Marjorie Taylor Greene has effectively changed her communication style. I think she's thinking big picture, guys. I think she's thinking about long term in her life and career. And let's be real, getting threats like death threats is no joke. That will in turn affect her communication. So when we think about communication as a process, the dynamic nature of communication process means that communication is irreversible. Once something has happened, it's happened. You think about in sitcoms and romantic comedies, people say, can we just start over? If only, right? But we can't turn back the clock and get a redo. It's impossible. And I think about years of communication and how one or two acts of communication can devastate a relationship, right? It happens. So, hold on one second. Come. Miscommunication. You heard my dog communicating. I think she's telling me that it's about time to go to the bathroom. We'll know if we hear the ding dong of the doorbell, right? Miscommunication can occur regardless of the degree of conscious thought and intention put in the message. For example, if David tells a joke and it offends his coworker Beth, he can't just say, "Oh, forget I said that. I didn't intend for it to be offensive." The message has been sent and it cannot be taken back. Conversely, though, when communication goes well, we try to recreate it. But in addition to communication being irreversible, it's also unrepeatable. It's never going to happen exactly the same way every single time. Those who have taken my public speaking course know this, and I try to be as understanding as anyone in communication because I understand that communication rarely, if ever, goes perfectly. When we think about culture and context, it plays a key role in how we perceive and define communication. Our Western culture tends to put more value on senders than receivers, and more on content than context of message. Those cultural values are reflected in our definitions of and in our models of communication. We'll talk more about that, but a short model would be the United States is considered as an individualistic culture, whereas emphasis is put more on individual expression and success in Japan. In Japan, it's collective. It's the group. I knew what I was trying to say. In the United States, it's the individual. Think about it. It's what you can do. Can I be the next YouTube hit? Can I be the next sensation? Right? We also put a ton on, both cultures put a ton on success, though. Don't kid yourself. There's lots of pressure in Japan. Lola, come. So, Japan, though, is more of a culturalistic collective society, group cohesion, group understanding, and group harmony. That's the focus there. Whereas in the United States, we're all about conflict. We don't seem to have a problem with that. It's part of the best being the best, right? Those strong cultural values are embedded within us and how we learn to communicate. There's more emphasis put on silence and nonverbal context in certain cultures, especially Japan. Lots of pauses. Whether it's in the United States, Japan, or another country, people are socialized from birth to the communication in culturally specific ways that vary by context. We can be culturally sensitive, and we're going to talk more about that later on in our class. Most people are born with the capacity and ability to communicate, but everyone communicates differently. Because communication is learned rather than innate, we've already seen that communication patterns are relative to the context and culture in which one is communicating. Many cultures have distinct languages consisting of symbols. A key principle of communication is that it is symbolic. Communication is symbolic in that words make up our language systems and do not directly correspond to do something or take care of something in reality. They symbolize a generalized meaning or a specific meaning, depending on what the culture is. The fact that communication varies so much among people, context, and cultures illustrates the principle that the meaning is not inherent in the words we use. Communication is learned. If you... Hold on one second. That was me communicating to the dogs. So if you go to France on vacation and you see the word poisson on the menu, it's not poison, folks. It's fish. The words don't look the same in English and French, but they're still the same object, right? I saw it and thought, oh my gosh, are they trying to give me poison for dinner, right? But if you put a picture of the fish on the menu, that would help a cultural deficient tourist like myself to understand what we would be ordering, because my French is spotty at best. And it's sad because I come from French lineage, unfortunately. So I wish I honored my French lineage. This was very apparent when my wife and I were in France. I interned at DB. It's an international advertising agency. We were called Poutine when we took the picture, I don't know if you can see it, down by the left leg of the Eiffel Tower. That's my wife and I. In our jacket, jeans. We don't really fit in. If you look at the picture, you can kind of tell. But we stopped a cab, jumped out, ran, oh man, probably 50 yards to get that picture. And then ran back to the car. We didn't really stop traffic. Cars could get around us. But, it was a taxi. Other taxi drivers called us poutine. You can look it up in French. I'm not going to tell you what it means, but it wasn't very nice. Remember, communication is learned. Symbolic communication is learned, negotiated, and dynamic. When I show you these images, how do you know them? Do you know what they are? The first images? Some old books from my library, right? Old volumes. Second image pertains very much to where I'm from. It's the arch, right? And the third one you won't get, probably. But that is the city flag for the city of St. Louis, where I'm from. The two rivers joining and becoming one are the Missouri and the Mississippi River. And that French fleur de lis is the shield of St. Louis, and because it was a French established city. My relatives came from Canada to originally settle in the St. Louis area a long, long time ago, well before the United States was a country. Communication is learned. Here's some more images. Let's look through these, right? We're going to talk more about verbal communication and how language works in Chapter 8, but I want you to look at, there's a picture. See if anybody can figure out what city that is. There's a symbol. Do you know what that one means? And then there's another jar with a symbol on it, right? Point is, we learn things over time. We learn about things. When we think about the transaction model of communication, powerful influence that social context and roles and norms all associate within the social context of communication, of our communication. We have to build in all these things, otherwise we're never going to be able to get our message across. So whether we're talking verbally or non-verbally, mediated, interpersonal, our communication is guided by rules and norms. Sometimes those rules lead to pointless conversations, or so we think. Like, good morning, how are you, right? They're phallic communication. Phallic. Oh boy. Phatic communication, meaning they're scripted. They're just responses we make in response to others. So, like, excuse me, pardon me, please pass the salt. Hey, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? Fine. That's phatic communication. What's the point of phatic communication? It's not really to inquire about well-being. It's not really to have a whole conversation. It seems pointless, but it has a reason. And I put it in there like a computer would. Generic reading, question, generic reading, response, and question, generic response. That's how a computer would see it, but in reality, this is to prove that communication is not pointless and it is always happening and it needs to happen. Phatic communication, we sometimes think it's pointless, but why do we do it? Because silence is awkward. Imagine you sit down next to that guy on the plane, and instead of talking to you, he's muttering about how he hates the world. He never responds to your attempts at phatic communication. No context as to why he looks the way he does. He just sits there in silence, staring at you and muttering under his breath. Would that not be freaky? That's why we use phatic communication. To create a community, create an involvement, create a sense of well-being. Let's take it one step further. All right? Now, you're on the return flight and you sit down next to these three gentlemen. They refuse to speak with anyone other than themselves. They talk in hushed tones. They speak in a foreign language. Sometimes they're excited and there's laughter in moments. Since they haven't talked to you, would you feel comfortable? Point is, these guys are going to a wedding. They booked a flight that is so close to the time of the wedding, they came in their traditional garb so they can be ready to go attend the wedding and go to the reception thereafter. Now you feel a little bit better, but you didn't know that without context, right? Faded communication is a way to help us all feel better. Think about unspoken norms for in a crowded elevator. We show politeness, concern, at least fake concern, right? Now the guy on the plane, he's on his way to see his girlfriend at the airport hotel. Like literally he's going to land in the city you're landing in. He's going to the hotel right outside the airport. She's been working out of town and she's into the Pennywise whole cosplay stuff. He's self-conscious but trying to make it work for their relationship, hence the muttering under his breath. Right? Context is everything, but if we don't use faded communication, we don't even get to context, right? The term faded derives from phatos, which is spoken in Greek. And it really means spoken bond. Spoken connection, basically, is what it means. To the degree and to what circumstances we engage in faded communication is also influenced by our norms and our rules. U.S. Americans find silence in social situations awkward. It's one socio-cultural norm that leads to faded communication. We tend to fill the silence with pointless words to meet social norms, but our Arabic friends don't do that, by the way. Stating to themselves, talking in a native tongue about the wedding and the reception, that's normal for them. They're not there for you. Culturally and situationally, relative principle of communication is the fact that communication has ethical implications. Communication ethics deal with the process of negotiating and reflecting on our actions, and communication regarding believing what we believe to be right and wrong. Aristotle said, in the arena of human life, the honors and rewards fall to those who show their good qualities in action. Aristotle focuses on actions, which is an important part of communication ethics. While ethics has been studied as part of philosophy for a long time, since probably honestly before Aristotle, it's only more recently become applied to communication. When we think about communication ethics, we're concerned about the decisions people make about what's right and wrong, rather than the systems, philosophies, or religions that inform us on those decisions. They come and play a part in that. Much of ethics is a gray area. Although we talk about making decisions in terms of what's right and wrong, the choice is rarely that simple. Aristotle goes on to say we should act to the right extent, at the right time, with the right motive, in the right way. We'll talk more on this in a little bit. Communication has broad ethical implications. We're going to talk about ethical listening, how to avoid plagiarism, how to present evidence ethically, how to apply ethical standards to mass media and social media. Those are just a few things we're going to learn in this course, right? We're going to talk about ethics in some detail in this book and in this course. But hopefully you can already see that ethics is a big part of communication, and it's an important part in my regard to communication. And our textbook tends to agree. We're going to talk about ethics because it's integrated in our academic, professional, personal, and civic context that I showed you earlier. It's difficult to state that something is 100% ethical or unethical just by quick evaluation. We have biases and we that we've learned over time, honestly. But here's a great example of ethical communication. Can I yell fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire? I mean, yes, technically I can yell whatever I wanted to, but my freedom of speech ends, that right to freedom of speech ends when I jeopardize other people's safety. And I'll be in charge for endangerment. And God forbid if anyone breaks their neck or dies in the incident, because then I could be charged for manslaughter, right? So think about what we say. There are consequences. Communication competence. This course is built to increase your communication competence. It's a focus of higher education, and thanks for hanging in there with me. I hope to be better before I record my next lesson. It's become a major focus in higher education over the past couple of decades. As really educated policymakers and advocates have stressed a back to basic mentality and the fact that we have a whole generation of people who really honestly didn't perform very ethically competent. So, and we're still showing some signs of that. But anyway, the ability to communicate effectively is often included in the primary undergraduate learning goal, which it is on our syllabus, along with other key skills like writing, critical thinking, problem solving. You probably haven't heard us professors or university administrators really use that term of competence, communication competence, but in reality, that's what we're trying to do. And communication competence refers to the knowledge and effective and appropriate communication patterns, as well as the abilities to use and adapt that knowledge in various contexts. So when we think about it, cognitive elements of competence include knowing how to do something and understanding why things are done a certain way. People develop cognitive competence by observing and evaluating the actions of others, and it can be developed through instruction and participation. Part 2. The second part of the definition of communication competence that we unpack is the ability to use, meaning me teaching you. Individual factors affect our ability to do anything. Not everyone has the same athletic, musical, or intellectual ability. At an individualistic level, a person's psychological and physiological characteristics affect our competence. When we think about other factors, our age, maturity, our ability to communicate, our level of education, person's mood, stress level, hunger, personality, and level of communication apprehension. If you're fearful of communication, all these factors will either help or hinder you when you try to apply the knowledge you've learned to actual communication behaviors. Part 3. We're getting there. We're very close to being done, guys. Thanks for participating and hanging in there. I'm sorry about my voice. The third part of definition that we unpack here of communication and competence, not incompetence, is the ability to adapt to various contexts, meaning not every situation, not every social situation or cultural situation is the same. Not every communication situation is the same, which makes it impossible to hold one standard for what counts as communication competence. There are social variables such as status, power. Those two affect competency, right? If we're having a conversation with a supervisor who has more power than us, the employee, we're typically going to adhere to the standards that the supervisor sets for communication competency, right? Cultural variables about where we're from. A Taiwanese woman speaks English as a second language, may be praised by her competence in English in her home country, but if she shows up here in the United States, her accent and mispronunciation of words, suddenly she's less celebrated in her English skills, right? It's just how things work in life. We can get better, though, and that's the goal of this. The NCA has defined what students should be able to do in terms of speaking and listening competencies by the time they graduate from college. And all these are listed in our syllabus if you look. State ideas clearly, communicate ethically, recognize when it's appropriate to communicate, identify their communication goals, select appropriate and effective medium for communicating, demonstrate credibility, identify and manage misunderstandings, manage conflict, be open-minded about another's point of view, listen attentively. Those are just a few of the competencies, but the major top 10. So that leads me to our homework in Unit 1. So let's talk about it. It's under Section 13.10, Getting Critical Box in the book. Okay? It's listed also in the lesson, so looking forward to your responses on that. You can email those responses. Thanks so much for participating, for being there. Even though I'm feeling way under the weather, I still intend to get the message across, and I hope to be better next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.